about doing regular releases up to 10, 15 times a day to production. So instead of doing a release every month when it's a big scary event where you have lots of merge conflicts and lots of things go wrong because you've forgotten what you did last month, it's about doing things really regularly. It's also about continuous feedback, the idea being that if you build one change and you wait 2 months to do it, what you probably thought in a UX thing is probably changed quite a bit since 2 months ago. Also, it's about building an artifact once instead of building. You build one artifact and you promote it for your different environments. So you have the same piece of code promoted from UX to dev to production, etc. So I'm going to talk about a little bit how we do stuff. Aqueducts, we use Scrum or Kanban. Hopefully you all know what those are. We do a lot of continuous integration, obviously, which we use Team City for. We try to do test-driven development, which kind of goes on from what Kern was talking about. So we try and aim to get about 95% code coverage on our Sitecore builds, doing very similar things to the abstractions which Kern was talking about. We do BDD, so that's basically writing acceptance tests using Gherkin and then Selenium to make sure all our functionality is working and testing the things we can't actually test because of Sitecore's dependencies. Hopefully you're going soon. So we also don't believe in branching. We have a master branch, and the idea is that every commit you make to source control is releasable. So if I make one bug fix, I know I have to do tests for it, and it's probably going to production in half an hour, so I'll be pretty certain it's working. The reason we do that is because if you do branches, then functionality is, you forget about it for 2 months because the business has changed their mind, and by the time you come back to merge it in, then you've got a world of pain because stuff has moved on so much. We also have a lot of monitoring in place, so that because we're doing releases all the time, we need to know if something's gone wrong. So there's a few more slides about different types of monitoring we do. So we have quite a few tools, or toys. So we use Team City with PowerShell and Pisaki to do our builds. We use something called Octopus Deploy to do our deployments, which fits in nicely with promoting artifacts between environments. We use config transforms for transforming our config files. Obviously Sitecore has quite a major bug that hopefully I'm going to nag them into fixing pretty soon, is any of the config files inside the app config include folder. If you have a transform in there, it breaks the entire Sitecore solution for some reason. Not quite sure why, but hopefully you'll fix it, code. So testing for the BDD stuff, we use SpecFlow and SpecRun, which is a Gherkin implementation. And SpecRun allows us to run multiple Selenium threads at the same time, so we can have 10 tests running at the same time. We use NUnit and not XUnit because XUnit is rubbish. We use something called BlazeMeter for load testing, so it's a load testing service in the cloud, which has got a nice API, so you can trigger load tests every time you do a commit. So for monitoring, we use something called AppFoul, which is like exception, logs all your errors out to the cloud, and it has a nice interface and API that will show you the trends of errors throughout your release cycle, so that if I get a big spike in errors this morning, then I know it's probably related to that release I did last night. New Relic, you've probably seen all the advertisements all over the internet that don't stop coming at you. It's pretty good, it's very detailed and very useful. So server density is a perfmon kind of monitoring tool. It just hooks into all your CPU usage, disk usage, and you can set up alerts for showing you if there's a problem on any of your servers. GeckoBoard is a kind of a monitoring dashboard, which kind of will aggregate all our stats about our website, the health of our website, into a nice kind of information radiator we have displayed in our office on a big screen. And pingdom just checks that the site's up, doing effectively a ping. That's a screenshot of AppFile for one of our websites. So we've got quite a few errors on there, 93,000. Obviously they're not causing the site to go down, they're being caught and logged and handled, etc. But it shows you a nice progression over time of what's happening with your errors, and you can, hopefully that's going to go down eventually, soon. But you can see the number of occurrences of specific types of error, and you can get alerts configured for certain types of error. So if we get a SQL connection dropout, then I'll get a very specific alert about that saying that the database has gone down. So screenshot of New Relic, it's very useful. It shows you the most time-consuming calls in our application. So there's a particular page called empty page for some reason that is the most busy piece of code. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but there you go. So that's an example of GeckoBoard. So this hooks into Google Analytics, Pingdom, server density, hooks into our build server, and shows us all the different metrics about what's going on. So it's on a big screen so that we know instantly if there's a problem. So this is our continuous integration pipeline. So obviously every commit goes through this pipeline. We have the standard CI build, which runs all our unit tests and creates an artifact that gets promoted. Then once it's done that, it deploys to dev. And once it's done that, it runs all our integration tests that are dependent on the Sitecore context. Then we have smoke tests, which are effectively BDD tests, Selenium tests that will just go and test a few key things that make sure the site is working. And if that passes, then we promote it to staging. And then once it's done that, it runs a full, sometimes we do them nightly because there's so many of them. If you've got several hundred Selenium tests, it takes a while to run. But ideally we should be running those on as soon as it's deployed to staging. And which we're basically testing every piece of functionality, so they will match up to all our user stories that we create. Obviously we have a weekly load test at the moment. We could be doing a daily one, which costs too much money. Well, I think it's $19 for 1,000 concurrent users, so it's pretty useful tool. We've been burnt a few times by performance issues, so it's just good to have that sanity check in there. Octopus Deploy is my new toy of the moment for promoting releases. So you can see that there's a particular version on a particular environment. Then in order to deploy to production, I literally go into this interface, I click a button, it does a push deploy out to the server and deploys it for me. So, and then it'll run all my tests against production as well. So I know pretty much if this works, and if my test failed, it will roll back to the previous version as well. So the tricky question of continuous delivery with Sitecore is managing the content. We haven't paid for TDS at the moment because I spent too much money on other toys. So what we did, we rolled our own version. Effectively what we do is we put an ASPX page inside the root of the site. And there's some code on there that will create a content package using the Sitecore API of all the layouts and all the templates. So on every deploy, we redeploy all our templates and layouts to make sure they're all there. So we haven't done that with content yet because it's a bit more of a tricky problem to solve because obviously users are updating that all the time. Hopefully you can see that. This is a basic code for generating a package through the Sitecore API. So as part of our CI step, it will call this web page from the dev environment, download all the templates, layouts, stick them in a zip file, and that gets put into our artifact for our release. This is the installer version, so we have this sitting on production. Obviously it's restricted, so please don't go and try and install stuff on our production environment. So this basically just takes the zip file and reinstalls it, and then it will publish it as well. probably a bit small to read, but it was just showing an example of, because we use transforms to handle all our configs, that we have to do a lot of painful work because Sitecore doesn't support it properly. What else is in there? So, yeah, so there's different things about you. This is a deploy.ps1 executes when you execute a deploy on production. It will call this PowerShell scripts. And you can do extra commands to tidy up, like make sure your Sitecore folder's there and it's not there on the front end, etc. So the question is, if you're doing deployments all the time, you're doing a big feature rebuild, how do you handle that new code going into production when it's not ready? We use feature toggles, which is basically we can turn off certain features or new features via a config switch. So the idea being that I can see a new feature in production if I'm logged in as a Sitecore user, but it's not visible to a normal user. So there's two kinds of feature switches we do. One is a standard, it's effectively an inline if statement. If there's a bug fix, so it's basically if new feature is enabled, then we'll execute this code. If it's not, we'll execute this code. The next iteration of that is if we're completely rebuilding a feature. So we're doing one at the moment for Man City, which we're rebuilding the fixture section on the site. It's a big, several month rebuild. We have like a site pipeline, which will dynamically switch the renderings at runtime. So we kind of intercept all the layout requests, take them off and put the new version on, depending if the feature's enabled. So I should have highlighted it, but it's called the render feature processor. I'm going to put this code on GitHub and it will show you how to switch out features at runtime. So this is an example of the code. So it's a pretty standard pipeline. It basically goes away and pulls all our features in and calls the process method. So you can see it's just checking that feature's enabled. And if it is, then we'll clear all the renderings and add the new version of the controls onto a page so that we know, well, it's just going to make sure the new version's there. It's not the perfect way to do it. We've got kind of an early stage of trying to do this, so if there are better ways of doing it, please tell me. So, as I said, we're at an early stage of doing this. We can't really handle content migration. I don't think you can really do that particularly easily using TDS anyway. It's without a manual kind of intervention. The dream is to have it fully automated. Obviously, the dream is to have kind of better test coverage, get our releases more regular. So we're not quite at a stage where it's every check-in at the moment. It's kind of once a day at the moment. So continuous deployment is the every check-in. And the last point is what I've been nagging the whole talk about is better transform support for Sitecore. So there you go, it wasn't 45 minutes, so that was good. Yeah, the idea is to deploy all the time, so you're not having a big integration point 6 months down the line. Have extensive monitoring, so you know if there's a problem. You should automate everything you do, and you should use feature toggling for testing new features in production. Cool. And we're trying to hire senior developers at the moment, so come talk to me. That's exactly why I'm here, yes. If you want a job, Kern.
So am I. He's going cheap now.
Sure. Cool. That's pretty much it. Any questions at all?
So how do you manage template conflicts between developers? So if I'm working with a database and so is he, and we both create the same template at the same time, mine's slightly different to his, how do you manage it?
We share we share a content database between us, so
it makes it hard to work off-site then?
we all have VPNs and so forth, so not particularly. It's an issue, I guess.
What do you use for source control?
Git, obviously, because everyone uses Git. So.
So what's the problem with, obviously, long-term branches going on, the trunk continuing? I understand what you said about code changing, but obviously the branches are just merging constantly.
Yeah, you can do merging quite easily, but it's just, we've had branches sitting there for 6 months because the client changed their mind and then it becomes a bit of a pain.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's the idea behind it.
So do you have a package per feature, and how do you maintain the releases? Do you install every package every time, and what do you have in the packages?
So the package contains all the templates and all the layouts we create, and it recreates the package every time and reinstalls it every time, so we know it's all there.
Okay, and that rendering engine hacking you're doing, how does that affect when you put the renderings into the presentation layer? Does that ignore it?
A lot of our clients don't use the page editor and such forth, so it's not too much of an issue for us. I find that clients very rarely change presentation anyway. I've yet to see one do it personally. It's more of a developer thing, so it's not an issue for us.
Have you managed to sort of clean up on when you do packages? Have you removed, say, templates and items, and renderings and layouts and files? Have your packages managed to clean up existing files that need to be removed?
Good question, we don't handle that at the moment. We probably should do. As I said, it's an early stage, it's the first iteration. We kind of do a merge install of content.
There's TDS packages, don't you?
So I'm not as bad as TDS.
Does your rendering engine break the HTML caching? Because you have to verify user for every single HTML cache you do?
I don't know, might do. We haven't noticed a performance problem, so.
Okay, cool.
The feature totaling, does that have an effect on the, sort of you're adding things to the pipeline, does that have an effect on the performance of the site? And so would you do that if you had something running across 4 servers, would you do it, say, just on 1 server to test features, or?
No, so this is running on 4 servers. We run it on all the servers at the same time, and they're generally turned off for new features until we usually have them on the CMS server just to test them. But yeah, we've not noticed any performance problem yet. It may come a point, but we're doing the regular load test, so we should know pretty quickly if there's a problem.
In terms of the CI, any special reason why you choose TeamCity over Jenkins or Cruise Control? And the other thing is that how are you actually integrating that with Octopus Deploy?
So we used to use Cruise Control, and then we moved to Jenkins, and now we've gone to TeamCity. I just think it's a better product, it's got a better interface, seems a bit more stable, it's more easily scalable to different build agents. Octopus Deploy and all the other tools like Jira, Git, obviously all got APIs, and they kind of plug straight into TeamCity. There's generally plugins for them.
The monitoring tools which you mentioned, are they kind of open source, or you pay for it, or?
Yeah, most of those are paid for tools, so AppFile is, depending on how many applications you have on it, but it's $20, $30, $40 a month. Pingdom is $5 a month. And your Relic you can get free if you know how to press the right button on the internet somewhere. Server density is about $100 a month, so there's not massive amounts of money compared to a really expensive site file license. You're not smiling, Kurt.
If you're doing continuous delivery, which suggests that you're dropping packages, how often is your package drop? How often is your servers changed?
As I said, at the moment it's several times a day.
So how are you handling the service downtimes or interruptions?
So we don't have downtime, otherwise we'll be out of a job. But we script our load balancer, so you can take a server out of the load balancer automatically.
So how are you handling, say, for example, web databases then? So if you have an array of load balanced servers, you're all talking from the same web database, how are you?
Nope. So we have a separate web database for each front-end server.
So how are you distributing the changes in that respect then? Are you replicating those, or?
So you install your changes to the master database, and then it installs the code onto each server one by one. So you take the server out, then you publish the changes to that particular web database, you put it back in, and you go through each one in turn.
And meantime, that node, we'll call it a node, is
Yeah.
out of service because of the load balance cost.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any issues with your smoke testing? The Selenium WebDrivers that you use, they randomly fail for you with sort of 4,000 exception or something like that?
I think there was like 40 tests failing at the moment because Dan, who was sitting over there, broke something the other day. So. Yeah, we've had problems with WebDriver, especially trying to scale it using spec run to run multiple concurrently. There's a bug in the WebDriver API. At the moment, I'm waiting for someone to fix that.
Just wondering what your approach is for rollback. You said you roll back in some files. Is it you know the previous live version and you roll back to that, or do you snapshot it before you deploy and then you roll back to the snapshot?
So what Octopus Deploy does is when it installs a new version of the code on the server, it puts it in a new folder called version X, and then it just switches the base directory of IIS site to this new folder, then restarts the app pool. So and then there's a button in Octopus Deploy, you go roll back to previous version, and just switch IIS back to the previous one.
The idea behind the feature toggles is that the code's always ready, so if we've deployed the templates or code to the database and published it, if we have to roll back the code base, it will still function even
On
if
the
we're using
advanced
templates.
database?
Yeah. So the idea is that we just it's additional. So whenever we don't take fields off templates, it gets a bit cumbersome because you've got lots of redundant fields that you're not using anymore. But over time we will revisit these and refactor them out. But
Even if that's a manual thing.
no, yeah, that's right. But as long as because we're always just adding and not taking away, then there's
No, run away? No?
I just mentioned that you just rolling back to previous, for example, website versions of the files. But what about database in this case?
Yeah, so that's kind of tied into what Dan was just saying, is the previous version, if we know it works, then it should still have all the same templates and stuff, content on there. So we don't delete content, we don't delete fields on the template, we add fields, so we know it should still work.
But what if the change is about to delete some fields?
The change is to delete some fields.
Yeah, for example, we have some old field and we remove one old field and add another 3 fields instead of this old field.
Yeah, I think that's the point. We don't delete the old fields until there's
Oh, right.
until we know it's stable.
Okay.
Hello? Okay. Good.